Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much, friends, for joining me for episode number 1 of Broken into Purpose. I am Khalilah Johnson, your undefeated life coach. I am a generational impact leader and legacy strategist, and I am truly excited to be here with you today on episode 1. Now, to give you a little bit of background from Broken into Purpose, what that's about, first of all, it is the subtitle to my first book, and right now, it's not my only book, but Undefeated Broken into Purpose is the name of my book. I wrote that in 2015, and it was a documentation of the generational curse that my family had been under. And I say had been, because we are no longer. And I declare that boldly and proclaim that the curse is broken and we are walking into our wealthy place. So right now, Broken into Purpose is a different version of the same radio show that I first did. This was the title of the first radio show I was approached about doing. And of course, I titled it Broken into Purpose. It fits so perfectly. But at that time, I was at the place of sharing my testimony from a place of identifying the curse, but not actually walking through the fullness of the process. And so through that time, I was offered opportunities to share and what I experienced was many people received breakthrough after breakthrough. As a matter of fact, I remember a woman, a elderly white woman, maybe around 80 or even 90. She was up there in age, and she was at one of the churches that I spoke with. I spoke at my uncle's church, and she came up and said, I've never told this, and whispered and said, I've never told anyone this before, but I was molested too. And I would get things like that. I spoke at a church in New Jersey, and a 75-year-old black woman came up to me and said, and she had been in the church her whole life. And she said to me, I didn't share this with anyone. There's no one I can share this with, but my husband beats me, and wherever you go, I'll follow you. And so that dynamic, when I saw different people have permission to speak their truth, it was an overwhelming just awe of God that he would use my story of brokenness to set people free. But I did not understand it, because to me, all I was doing was sharing a tragic story. And yet I was standing there as a demonstration, not realizing that I was an epitome of what God was able to do, and that gave people hope just in just standing alive. And so I want to be able to give you another version of that same thing. Not only now do I declare that I can identify the curse, but God set me down at a moment that people were offering opportunities to share my story. And I was grateful for the impact and overwhelmed by all of the impact that it was making. But when God says that's not the end of it, now we understand the power of identifying the cycle. We identify the root of a situation. We identify where something is a pattern. And we can identify demonic patterns and cycles that are in our bloodline, in our community, in our society. Once we identify it, it gives us the power to be able to call it back. Now, the Bible speaks about sevenfold payback. So at that moment, I only knew to identify it, but that was a major part of it. I'm not taking anything away from that. That was purposeful. That was important, that many people could start to recognize, wait a minute, I'm in a cycle. And so sometimes when we're in survival mode, we don't understand. And just to give you what that cycle was in my family, 3 generations, and I'll say 4. But my grandmother, my mother, me, and even my daughter, I was a teenage mother. I had 2 children by 17. I had so much abuse in the home. My mom my father was abusive, and then she married my stepfather, who was then abusive, and it was a recurring cycle. My grandmother was molested from early ages, and then my mom was molested at the same age and raped at the same age, and then here am I, 3 years old, and being touched in inappropriate ways. And the thing about that was so confusing was when I was held down at the same age my mom was, and it didn't stop with me. And so it becomes a place where you're so desperate, where it became so heavy on me that I had to recognize that something had to change. And I don't know what I can do. I'm a mess. I'm a screw up. I felt like there was hopelessness all around me, but there became this place where I knew that God would not let me rest and he wouldn't let me go. So I had to figure this thing out. So it was a place where give up turned into surrender. And I raised my hands and said, Lord, you got to show me. You got to show me how to fight this. It's got to end. And so that led me on a desperate journey of surrender, of dying to self, of dying to who I thought I was and who I would always be. And that opened me up to seeing God's plan for my life, even though my experiences said something different. And so today, title of the show, I didn't open with that, but it's the power of vision. And in a moment, you'll understand what that is, because everything starts with it's a saying that my mentor, Dr. Cindy Trimm, powerful woman of God. And she says this, your feet will never take you where your mind has never been. Dream big. So I'm going to take you on a journey. Visualize this with me. Hundreds of people all leaning in, taking hold of every word spoken as if I were offering them their freedom. I walk across the stage, postured in boldness, with confidence, connecting with every person in the room. Every word is carefully executed with wisdom and persuasion, and everyone under the sound of my voice is captivated. It's as if I had something they needed and they knew it. With determination, I deliver my words as if they were the key to unlocking them from their invisible prisons of fear, deception, and insecurity. And if I had my way, no one was going to leave the same. My words and posture of confidence all communicated authority. I tried holding on to this moment for as long as I could before being pulled back into reality. See, the temperature of my bath water I was soaking in at the time had turned cold. It was just a daydream. Or was it? This is what I saw years ago, and the revelation I spoke with was beyond words I could have made up in my head, because at that time, I had trouble remembering how to speak full sentences without losing track of thought. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let her go. I needed to see her, me, again. It had only been a few hours prior to that moment. I was released from the psychiatric ward. Yes, the psychiatric ward. I had spent 3 days in group sessions listening to a therapist teach about coping mechanisms and painting handmade trinkets. Just days before that, I was at a hospital getting my stomach pumped from the pills I took to stop my pulse. My doctor at the time misdiagnosed me with a complex case of bipolar, and his many attempts to finding the right combination of drugs to treat me would often have him switching my meds every couple of weeks. So I had a grocery bag full of half-empty pills, enough to stop a horse from breathing. Yet there I was, still alive and miserable. My mom was the one who got me help. She came by unannounced on an afternoon she usually would have been at work. I wrote my suicide note, took my grocery bag full of pills, and laid waiting for all the hurt to end. Now, I don't know if I really wanted to die or if I just wanted to go to sleep so I wouldn't feel anymore. Right when I thought it was almost over, I heard, Khalilah, Khalilah. It was my mom. What in the world was she doing here? I thought. I was almost free. Half groggy, but still able to come to, I went downstairs to find my mom in my living room. Yes, I answered. What are you doing here? And then she says, I need to use your bathroom. Not really in the mind to debate her or try to figure out why she had such a weird request, I told her to use the kids' bathroom. It was only a few steps away. She said, no, I want to use yours. And at that point, I was getting very sleepy and it was becoming hard to stay awake, so I let her go upstairs to use my personal bathroom. An odd request, but I hoped she would then leave. But when she went upstairs, she found the note. I had written how it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just too hard to go on, as if that would offer some relief to those I left behind. By the time she got downstairs, I was unconscious. The next moment I remember, I woke up with tubes down my throat. My on-duty nurse, Nadine, who was also a family friend, was in my room, and she says to me, you're so lucky. But I didn't feel lucky at all. The pain was back with a force, tightening my chest and turning my stomach into knots. My reality was, I had just caught my husband, cheating again. And when I confronted him, he not only showed no remorse, he had me arrested. He said I assaulted him and I was bipolar. He never even showed any emotion. And this last incident was just the proof at the time I needed to give into the lies that I was worthless and my children were better off without me. You see, with all the recent tragic events compiled with the trauma I'd experienced my whole life, hearing the words that came from my own mouth, words of encouragement, faith, and empowerment were words I needed to survive. I remember seeing myself say, God can do it. He will do it. Hold on. This wasn't a dream, but a glimpse into my future that gave me hope that my current troubles were in no means the end. Not only have I seen that vision, part of that vision, come to pass, but I've had the privilege to grace stages and see the power of my words and story transform many, and it's only the beginning. It's shocking, really. I mean, what the enemy thought that he was destroying me with, now I was in a room and seeing people get closer to God. It's as if the weapon that was used against me was now a weapon against the enemy himself, and I was letting others free. Now, the process to getting from there to here was not an easy one, but if I could do it, anyone could. And I plan to continue to use my life, my story, and my truth as a demonstration and blueprint to overturn false verdicts of shame, guilt, and hopelessness. That is why the saying, "You will never go where your mind has never been," is such a true statement for me. Where we are is a direct reflection of what we believe, and what we believe can limit our imagination to create a difficult reality, a different reality. Toxic generational patterns are often formed from handed down perspectives. And without changing our worldviews, we continue to repeat what we've seen. But there are those that break out of the dysfunctional cycles, the ones who dig deeper and search outside of what's familiar. The overcomers that discover the treasures buried in history, learn the lessons produced from pain, and endure the process to become what has never been. The history makers, world changers, deep thinkers, and problem solvers. But how? If we look through history, we can find stories of those that overcame impossible odds to create incredible futures. We look at Oprah, we look at Tyler Perry, we look at Nelson Mandela, and the list goes on. And we can look around us also and find many we know who have endured great battles who've never recovered. And when I began this deliberate journey of resilience and was faced with difficult challenges I needed to push through, I would have to repeat to myself, even if I didn't believe it, if it can be done, I can do it. I had to silence the voices that fed my doubt and digest the stories that developed my faith. Resilience is built by determined decisions that defeat odds and push past all resistance. It's like being in a place that you can see the stepping stones of where you are, and you also can feel that there's something greater, and you've never been there before, but you know it exists. It's a pursuit. It's taking every thought captive and aligning it with truth. I can, I will, I must. It's getting back up, no matter how many times you've been knocked down. Think back, have you ever been around someone that after talking to them, you felt defeated, exhausted, just miserable? What about the times when you were around a person that had the gift that no matter what you were feeling at that moment, they could lift you out of the depths of despair and bring you into the reality that there was hope and possibility? That's why it's so important that what seeds you allow to be planted in your mind, because they will reap a harvest, good or bad. Now, let's face it. We didn't have a choice in what developed us as children. And many times, if unconfronted, we're still making distorted decisions from the past. And many have come from a family who they themselves did not know the power of their words or even their identity, combined with the toxic, repetitive belief systems that were passed on. I know the struggle. For generations, many women in my family experienced abuse before the age of 5, and throughout their life repetitively went through abuse, then chose destructive relationships, which further developed deep-rooted fear, low self-esteem, and a victim's mentality. Imagine the difficulty of seeing yourself as worthy after having so many experiences of tragedy. Unfortunately, I didn't escape and experienced abuse as an adolescent and teenager, and even became a teenage mother. I wanted so desperately to prevent the same fate for my children, but once again, I heard the painful confessions of much of the same. After surviving an abusive marriage that almost mentally destroyed me, I not only fought to survive, I fought to stop the cycle. Enough was enough. I'm now married to a wonderful man who loves God and pursues God on the same level. And I know he deserves me and I deserve him. And I know that it was from surrendering. After battles to overcome mental anguish and paralyzing thought patterns, suicidal thoughts, and bouts of depression that felt like I was in an invisible prison, I fought my way out by taking captive my thoughts, examining my beliefs, carefully weighing my words, and challenging my fears, and increasing my expectancy. This was no cakewalk, but a fight for not only myself and my bloodline. I didn't want another child or person to deal with this unimaginable pain. So I became intentional of my days, thoughts, habits, environment, and support. I knew I couldn't change the past, but my future was the sum of my decisions. Now, this wasn't a perfect walk. I made many step backs. And I remember hearing God say, this is not about perfection. This is about surrender. You see, this is not about, okay, now I know. And once you identify, everything goes around. I still fell into bad relationships right after identifying this is definitely a curse. Right after asking God and saying I surrender, I still fell for the same traps of before. But I got back up and said, Lord, change me. It was no longer a place that I stayed tired and just made excuses. But I said, this has got to change. And that place, that decision to change, the things that I struggled with before, as I continue to get back up and say, change me again. Deal with this area, deal with this area. And to my surprise, the areas that I wanted him to deal with were the outward appearance of godliness. I wanted him to take away the cigarettes. I wanted him to take away the alcohol. I wanted him to take away the look of shame. But he dealt with my heart. He dealt with my mind. He dealt with the things that I was able to imagine. He let me imagine and see myself in places that I had never been. And then he called me higher. Many times we build off of the beliefs of our past, never giving ourselves permission to choose a different future. We are not limited by the life we've been given, but the limits of our imagination. So take this time to get into a godly imagination. Be ready to go on a God-sized adventure. Be ready to discover the childhood wonder that you may have missed out on due to childhood trauma, or maybe recognize the many wonders that you have missed out on trying to do it all in your own power. There's a power in surrender. There's a power in just submitting yourself to God and saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how I got here. And I don't know if I'm pursuing things for the right reasons. I just want to be in the will. I just want to be in a place where I can start again. And so this place that turns from, I'm tired. It turns into a place of, I'm desperate. I'm desperate for change. I'm desperate for things to turn around. I'm desperate like the woman with the issue of blood that the scripture talks about, that reached out from her 12 years of dealing with this issue with the blood, and she reaches out for the hem of his garment, taking the risk of being ostracized, of being ridiculed for coming out of her place that she was supposed to stay confined, coming out of the confines of what society said she could stay in. These are the places that you can go. You can't come up here, but God says, I'm reversing that in you. I'm reversing that in your bloodline. And if you could just dare to believe in me more than you dare to believe in what you've experienced, no matter how hard, no matter how difficult, no matter how powerless you may have felt, reach out for me. I've always been here. You're not waiting on me. I'm standing right here. I'm waiting on you to recognize your need for me. I want you to do the work. And it starts with just saying, I surrender. So dream big, pray, and give yourself permission to go where you've never been. Get ready. The time is now to shift the mindset from repetitive generational cycles into legacy-minded, leaving a blueprint for the next generation, for those that you'll never meet that'll finish what you started today. So I'm I'm thankful that you stepped in to listen to this podcast. And I hope that you'll come back. Come back again. It's so much more that I have to share, and there's an airplane going over me, and I'm not going to edit that. Because if you're paying attention to the words, that won't be a distraction. I want you to understand that this is not by chance that you made it to this podcast. It's not by chance that this podcast caught your eye. Because you know that what you endured, it has purpose. And it's not the end. There's such a thing as post-traumatic stress disorder now. When they rightfully diagnosed me, they gave me the disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of all the trauma that I'd experienced. But then there is this other thing that's called post-traumatic. I think it's post-traumatic growth syndrome. And it's literally where you push past the trauma and you continue to persevere, where the resistance becomes resilience. And all of a sudden you rise stronger than when you even began the trauma. It's where you find that inner core strength. The Bible says that greater is he that lives on the inside of us than he that is in the world. This is the place where at your weakest place, God says, now I'll take over. And you tag out. You say, I don't know what's next, but I know it's got to change. And so I just want to encourage you this week, this day, dream, daydream, imagine, expect greater. Shift your mindset. Challenge the thoughts that you have accepted as truth. Challenge your identity. Challenge the way that you see yourself. See where the root came from. Who said it? What was it that caused you to accept less? And just make a decision. Let go. Forgive. Move past this place of feeling stuck. There is something on the other side of this. You just got to be desperate enough to go for it. So that's today's show. That's episode 1 of Broken into Purpose. And again, come back. We're going to do episode 2, and I'm not going to tell you the title. I'm going to let Holy Spirit lead. And I want you to ponder on what the words I've spoken. And I want you to think about your own life in that aspect. And I want you to confront the past in order to make impact in the future. Extract those things, the strength that comes from feeling when you're at your weakness. Nothing is wasted. All right, until next time, I'm Khalilah Johnson, your undefeated life coach. You can stay in contact with me by subscribing to my email list that's on KhalilahJohnson.com. Also on social media, follow me at Brazen Nation Media. Find that page and connect with me. I am continuing on this journey of obedience. And I told you earlier that I had done a show and I had to sit back for a moment. God had me sit down for a few years in order to cultivate the healing process and go through the process. And so now I have the practical steps, the spiritual steps, and the guidance in order to give you the steps that I've actually walked through. And so I want you to join me because I'll be sharing that practical, spiritual empowerment to bring you from the place of repetitive cycles into living legacy-minded. And God bless you. Until next time.